Welcome and thank you for joining us at The Conversation, which is produced by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. I'm Paul Grondahl, Director of the Writers Institute. Before I introduce our guest today, Christopher Shaw, I wanted to remind you that this and all of our author conversations and interviews are posted on the Writers Institute YouTube channel, and you can also find them at The Conversation on our website, nyswritersinstitute.org. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you want to support programming like this going forward, you can also find a place on our website to make a donation, nyswritersinstitute.org. We'd be very grateful for that. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Christopher Shaw, a noted journalist, editor, and novelist. He's a native of Schenectady and built his career in the Adirondacks. He's a former editor of Adirondack Life magazine, was a producer and commentator of the program Northern Voices of North Country Public Radio. He later taught creative writing at Middlebury College in Vermont and directed his program on environmental literature. Environmental journalism. He retired from Middlebury in 2018. His articles, stories, and essays have appeared in numerous publications, anthologies, journals, magazines, and is also the author of a previous book of fiction titled Sacred Monkey River, A Canoe Trip with the Gods, published by Norton in 2000. His most recent book is also a novel. It's titled The Power Line. It was published in August by Outskirts Press. We'll focus our conversation today primarily on that novel. I consider him a colleague and a friend, and it's a great pleasure to welcome to the Writers Institute, Christopher Shaw. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it. I should point out, though, that Sacred Monkey River was narrative nonfiction.
Okay.
Where I traveled to the Usumacinta River watershed in Chiapas and Guatemala and ran the river at a time of a lot of political environmental upheaval.
I apologize. I saw somewhere, I thought it was a travel log, and I saw somewhere it was referred to as a novel. So my apologies. Sacred Monkey.
No, isn't it? Haven't you found that people get mixed up about what a novel even is?
I think this is what you're beginning is very interesting when it talks about truth and memory, and so we'll get to the power line. But first of all, I know you're a great fan and admirer. In a way, it's an homage to our founder, William Kennedy.
Absolutely.
The great novelists of our time, and he's certainly been fascinated with prohibition and gangsters, and particularly Legs Diamond, his book Legs. I should say that Legs is a central character in the Power Line. So talk about how you got interested in this whole genre and Legs in particular.
Well, growing up in Schenectady, you would hear stories from old timers. Everybody saw Legs or knew about Legs or something. So that was not that unusual. At the time I discovered Bill's writing, I had been living in pretty remote places for quite a while and trying to figure out how you would make a kind of contemporary literature out of the ingredients of the experience of the Adirondacks. And models were hard to find. And I didn't know, maybe a little bit of Jim Harrison, a little bit of, I don't even remember what, in the 70s. There were some people out there, but they didn't really ring exactly true for me until, the early 80s when I stumbled on Ironweed in the Broadway bookstore in Albany. And I stood there and read the first chapter, and it blew my mind. And I realized that here was one of the best possible, this was something I had been looking for all my life.
Yeah.
A language and a landscape that I recognized sieved through a really contemporary and, in fact, magical realist sensibility.
Right.
And I was just hooked, and I read everything. I went back and I read Legs, and I read And that knocked me out because legs, everybody, Schenectady, Albany, legs diamond. Oh my God. All these old drunks I used to work with at Albany Ladder, they're
Right.
always like, yeah, well, legs diamond down on Pearl Street.
Well, you had Legs de Coco in Schenectady. He was
Legs
quite
de
a
Coco, good old legs. It turns out all these kids and girls I knew in high school were all their children.
the local industry on
Oh yeah.
the
Well,
underground.
and as a matter of fact, my next book, which I hope is going to be out in a year or so, is a memoir about a 50-year friendship with a guy named John Cody, who was a famous wild man like George Saratoga, and was from Schenectady.
Mm.
And a lot of people in Schenectady and Albany will remember him. But
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, John's life had the flavor of a Bill Kennedy novel, very, very much. The most possible contemporary setting for the 70s, 80s. So when I saw that, it was around the same time that I discovered the poems of another Bill, William Bronk of Hudson Falls, and they had a similar flavor and ring for me. I mean, it was like, birch bark and blueberries and, the sound of the voices, the way the speech of local people in Bill's novels.
Right.
That rang for me, and it was depicted in a way that wasn't sentimentalized. It wasn't Cracker Barrel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was serious, and it was down to earth, and it was kind of weird. Because people were weird and they talked really weird like that. Their expressions weren't always that clever.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Now I want to talk too the sort of your own experience that led to this novel, aside from really digging Bill Kennedy's writing on the Prohibition and gangster era.
Yeah, I also stole the main character's name, is from Francis
Fran Germain, exactly. But you were living in Rainbow Lake, which you should describe roughly where that is. I've never been there in the Adirondacks, and you were swimming regularly to this little island, and take up the story from there.
Well, yeah, I'd been around, the area all my life, and other parts of the Adirondacks too. But at this point, was after I'd been at the magazine. And Rainbow Lake it's part of a little chain there between Jones Pond and Lake Kushiqua on Chiota, kind of off the beaten track. And Rainbow Lake itself is not spring fed, but it has a little channel into a spring fed pond called Clear Pond. It's really pretty, and only one camp on it, and trails off into the woods, really great boreal woods, a lot of birds. And at the end of Clear Pond, there was another couple of channels around an island into this, what they called the slough, where it was sort of low, weedy water. So it was this kind of interesting microcosm, right, of Adirondack canoe country.
Mm-hmm.
And on this little island, there was a nice place to swim into deep water, and birches and pines, a classic little Adirondack Lake island, which you could tell had been connected on either side by bridges. And I had been, the postmistresses and postmasters of the small towns in the Adirondacks have been the central figures of sources of information for people for decades.
Right.
And, I was just in the post office one day, and I said, "Hey, Francis, what was on that island over there?" He goes, "Oh, that was Legs Diamond's camp."
Ah.
What?
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah, his brother was, here at the treetops or whatever it was curing from tuberculosis, and that he had a camp built over there, and that's where he used to go and hide out. But everybody said he didn't do any bootlegging around here." So anyway, I just when I guess it was around 2001, 2002, I got treatment for an illness, and I'd started teaching at Middlebury, and I wanted to just get an Adirondacks book. I mean, Jesus, here I'd been here all this time, and I didn't have an Adirondack. So I figured, what can I do? I was just make it a kind of a fun book and throw all this stuff I knew into a big grab bag,
Right.
and shake it up and see what happened. But I needed a couple of interesting characters, and I'd known enough. It's safe to say that both Fran Germain and Lonnie Monroe are composites of many, many people.
Right. Yeah,
who I'd known for 40, 50 years.
They're backwoods guys who know how to, they've got this job, and we'll talk about the title, but they're guys who can guide, who can do any kind of job you would need. But I like the structure, the technique. You've got this oral historian, really, Abel St. Martin, who's trying to interview a lot of the old timers in the Adirondacks. And this Fran Germain's got an amazing story, but you also begin it with a little funny kind of metafiction, like, do we really know what truth is, and can we trust memory of somebody recalling these events from the past? So why did you want to structure that? It's almost like peeling back the onion. This is being told to somebody, and they're kind of taking it in, and it's many years after the fact. Why did you like that technique?
Well, for one thing, I was trying to justify the fact that I was going to screw around with history.
Okay.
So, for instance, Paul Smith was never alive during Prohibition.
Right.
I just he was more interesting than his son, right? So I just moved him up. But he was the character who dammed the Saranac River, and that was, deemed illegal by the State Commerce Commission back in the 90s or something.
Right.
Like that. So that was one reason. Another is this, yes, in the process of writing this other memoir, the next book I have coming out, I realized that my memory was a mess. I mean, I had so many things completely wrong. It got me in trouble.
Mm.
I mean, I fixed it before, I actually finished the book, but I had published a piece on the Adirondack Almanac blog, and this old friend got to say that this was completely wrong. He said, I really liked it, but it was really wrong.
I should say our mutual friend.
So that was another thing. And, there's also this aspect of, guiding, which is like connected to storytelling.
Right.
And making up big howlers.
Yeah.
Which we used to do.
Right.
We used to, like on the river, we'd tell, see, it looks like, because of the optical illusion of the current and the rocks in the current, it looks like the rocks are moving upstream. And we'd say, look at those big rocks, look, giant river turtles moving upstream to spawn. People go, wow, did you see the river turtles? Yeah, we saw the river.
Right.
That's not very nice.
I should mention our mutual friend, John Warren, the editor of the Adirondack Almanac, who has heard so many great Adirondack stories. He's also a staff member of the Writers Institute, right, and a good colleague, and he does all of our digital and video work and everying. So
absolutely, and a great boon to the Adirondacks in New York State.
Yeah, I know he loves when you write for him. But let's talk about. I was particularly interested in Teddy Roosevelt because I did a biography of Teddy Roosevelt, his early life, which includes his first book, The Birds of Franklin County, which you use and you reference in your book. But everything that you use in Teddy Roosevelt seemed historically accurate. I mean, you seem to be very accurate on a lot of different things. How did you decide when to veer from history
well, there were some things that I wanted to show had happened there, but not in a academic historical way, in a living historical way. Right. So not only is Teddy treated like that, but the general culture of tuberculosis was treated like that. The general presence of bootlegging was treated like that, really. Teddy was central to that little area around Paul Smith's and St. Regis. And And in fact, old timers did talk about him that way, right? Like, you know, one of the things I'm trying to show with some of my essays and with this book a little bit is the impact on local culture that matters of the intellect and philosophy have actually had, and the flow back and forth there, right? So not only was Teddy influenced by the old timers in the Adirondacks and the guides, you know, the cowboys in North Dakota, but they were influenced by him.
Right.
And in Keene Valley, you know, William James and Adler and a few others were definitely influenced by old timers like Old Mountain Phelps and other local people.
Right.
And that symbiosis, going back to Emerson and Follansbee Pond, has always been there.
Right.
Without saying something like, you know, I mean, there's a lot of bullshit in the Adirondacks about real Adirondackers, you know, and it's a sort of a useless thing, and they have been more affected by the people who have been among them from outside than anybody realizes, and that's in a good way,
right?
And the other way around, you know.
So the action really picks up when Legs Diamond is on the scene, and there's these voluptuous flapper women, and even though it's prohibition, everybody is sampling the product. I mean, it's a boozy party atmosphere you describe, but that's the first depiction that I've seen that you really have Legs. He's very crude, and I mean, Bill's version, I think, is not as pushed to the limit as you did. Why did you want to make him? He's completely unlikable and the worst kind of thug and ugly speech, and
he's a gangster cartoon.
Yeah.
As I told Bill, you know, I didn't copy his Legs. I didn't write a historical Legs or a sympathetic Legs. He's not really a major character. He's only a little bit. He's influenced. He's got one scene really,
which is a great scene. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And as I told Bill, the one I modeled him on was the Dutch Schultz character in
Cotton Club.
I'm sorry.
The Cotton Club.
Cotton Club.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's loud and brash and obnoxious. Yeah. You know, matter of fact, I told the guy who's doing my audiobook right now, I said, you know, he doesn't sound so nice, really. He's like a gangster cartoon.
Yep.
You know, that's what he is.
So, how much documentation or historical accuracy? Essentially, you have Fran and Lonnie know all the back roads, and they're able to smuggle across the border from Canada through these little unknown back roads and avoid capture. Was it documented that was the route in Prohibition?
Yeah, more or less. You know, I mean, there's not as much. I mean, there's mostly amateur scholarship, you know, and there's some good things, and most of it I've picked up. There's a guy in Saranac Lake, Howard Riley, who writes for the paper. He's very good. And, you know, he would go into newspaper reports and stuff like that, and he would talk to old people.
Right.
And one of the other seeds of the book was, I mean, I knew a couple of guys whose last name was LaFountain, and they were both local businessmen and total scoundrels. You know, one had, you know, always been, you know, smuggling of various substances, you know,
right.
Finances, antique business, you know, importing, and lived in a nice house. The other one had one of the really nice restaurants in Lake Placid for years. And their uncle, I think, had been a guy named Bert LaFountain, who had a famous hotel and speakeasy in and was a bootlegger in Gabriel's. So I smuggled him into the book. But the other seed was this rumor I had heard from them about the shootout at Donnelly's Corners, where anybody who knows the area up there knows is like the best soft ice cream stand in the world. So if you think I'm not going to put the power line for sale at Donnelly's Ice Cream. So that was another one of the seeds, and that was one of the historical things I looked for. I couldn't find, but I kept hearing people talk about it. So I made it up.
Right.
And really, Paul, I have to confess to you that most of the history in the power line is not very historical.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly pretty whimsical and based on history, but none of it is true history. The stuff about Teddy is pretty close.
Yeah.
And
Paul Smith,
that's mostly out of his journals.
Yeah.
Actually. So he kept really good journals as a kid, that are fun to read and really wilderness adventure.
Yeah, those were some of the most important times of his young life, his summers in the Adirondacks, mainly to help his asthma. And he was very enamored and influenced by Paul Smith. And I mean, that's right? I mean, Paul Smith was like the tycoon of the era. He had huge holdings and wealth. And did he really, you call it Paul's effing electric company in the novel, but did he really, I should know that history, but I don't. Did he create that power line? You changed?
No, he did. No, he started the original electric company in Saranac Lake, and slowly started moving out from there. And he dammed the falls at Franklin Falls and Union Falls for hydro. And those are old. I mean, maybe they've replaced them now, but geez, when I used to paddle down there back in the 80s, they were still running these like ancient, hydro plants.
Was he despised in his time, do you think?
I'm sorry?
Was he despised, by his contemporaries?
Oh, who knows? I don't think so. I mean, these guys respect him. They just talk about him the way, you talk about your big shot boss.
Yeah.
I think, as anybody who has that kind of a sizable reputation in a small place like that is going to, have a mixed reception. One of the duties of, writing a novel, I think, is, especially if you're going to write about a place that sort of exists in a snow globe of sort of idealism, is to present a counter narrative. I don't really think the counter narrative I present about the region and Paul Smith is very far off track.
Right.
The elements of anti-Semitism I've picked up through making connections to things people have said locally over the years, even about Bob Marshall, it's like, these are the guys that, the Sulzbergers, the Marshalls, the Guggenheims, 3 camps right in a row on Lower Saranac Lake. And they were the ones that basically gave all this land up in the upper lakes to the state.
Right.
And that was oh my God, that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of resentment over local stuff like that. And also just, your basic sort of anti-Semitic bullshit.
Right.
But the importance of, the Jewish contribution to just wilderness thinking and protection, and especially the evolution of the Adirondack Park, is central and important, along with all the patrician.
Yeah, of course. I mean, those massive tens of thousands of acres hunting lodges for the wealthy, like Teddy Roosevelt was connected to, and things. I mean, they preserved both the Adirondacks, in his case, out in Dakotas and things.
Sure.
But there's a reason that wealthy people, can be preservationists if they own such vast quantities of land. But what about the title, the power line? To me, seems to be a really powerful metaphor of that tension of development and progress versus those who want to keep it forever wild, or some image of what they
There's,
think wilderness is. Talk about why you chose that,
there's,
what it
well,
means.
it's interesting you get that element. It's mostly about that period of transition, which I think is kind of murky in people's Adirondack historical minds. It's a really interesting period. One of the great Adirondacks books is The Healing Woods, and by Martha Reben, who is a really fascinating figure, and that has sort of undercurrents and of resonance in her memoir of curing in Saranac Lake in the 20s and getting rowed up to, Round Lake and the next little pond up there by a local guy, and they live on this island together, excuse me. And she gets better.
Hmm.
And it's a fascinating story. And I forget what the question was because the phone rang.
Yeah, I know. No, I was just talking about the metaphor of the title, the power line. It's almost like this
right.
character. And, yeah.
So I lived under that power line for a long time, and it was a bane for a lot of reasons because underneath it was a snowmobile trail.
Yeah.
And it was a scar. It was also a really good trail to ride a bike on, and it gave a little edge and opening for blueberries and various critters and stuff. So I spent a lot of time on it, and I also spent a lot of time thinking about dams and dam removal and things like that. So that development was, I think, really important and central to the way things tried to go or almost went or couldn't quite go in the Adirondacks, the way is often the story. But in any case, it electrified the area,
right?
But not completely. I mean, to the point where in the 60s and 70s, I knew lots of places that didn't have electricity.
Wow.
It ran just fine.
Yeah.
So there would have been a shadow zone there, right, between the past and the present, which I caught the tail end of,
mm-hmm.
right, in the 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s in Stony Creek, and North Creek and the High Peaks. And that's what I kind of wanted to evoke and bring alive. I didn't have the title, Paul.
No?
Until I was copy editing this book before I published it.
Mm.
And I started to write down on a yellow pad a list of my favorite titles to see if I could come up with something. And the second one I wrote down was The Shadow Line.
Mm.
And then I just wrote right next to it, The Power Line. I thought, where was this for the last 17 years since I wrote the book?
Yeah, talk about the path and journey of this novel, because you finished it a while ago, then you set it aside. Why did you wait to publish it and things?
I had this agent who had a big time writer, and the big time writer published a similar novel at the same time. She never told me it was happening, and I waited 5 months to hear from her, and she said stupid stuff about it, and which I kind of believed. And then I looked at it, and a couple of good readers, Jay included, had said good things to me, and but it still seemed like a jury rigged thing to me. I mean, so much of it is just stolen out of other books and movies, and everybody's gonna notice the scene that I stole, stuff like that. And I said, I'm going to come back to it later. I'm going to rewrite that whole last part. So then I got busy with other stuff, and I got sick again, and I wrote another book. And I realized I had 3 existing Adirondacks books,
Ah,
right, that should be published. So I thought I'm going to find this one. I'm going to see if I can do anything with it.
right.
And I had a friend scan all these old files together and make a single file out of it. I read it through and I went, huh, all that stuff I thought used to bother me doesn't bother me anymore. I kind of like reading it,
Yeah.
and I showed it to somebody else and they said, hey, that's really good. I what? All right. So I hired a copy editor and I hired a designer, and I figured, like there's a bit of a ticking clock here going on, right? Times chariot and all that.
Mm.
So I figured I could send this around for 3 years again at a time when nobody's really interested in stories about old timers in the Adirondack.
Right.
Or I could just get it out there and do it. So I got a good designer, I got a good copy editor, and there you go. But that's how it happened. But the Powerline title was only at the very end.
Mm. I mean, the voice and the language of Fran Germain is great. I mean, you really pitch perfect on that. I mean, he's a sort of a rough-hewn, backwoods guy, but it's not a caricature, but I really like the voice you captured with him.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Both those guys, they've been to Europe, they'd been in the war, they'd been to Mexico, they'd been around, they'd done a ton of stuff by the time they were back there in the present time of.
And Legs even mocks them for being war veterans. Yeah, but I also like that it's a little bit of a buddy movie. Those two guys are great together. They play off each other and everything. And yeah.
My friend Kirk Sullivan, the filmmaker, says they're just like Butch and Sundance. I'm like, no, I don't think so. They're a little crabbier they're not as cute as Butch and Sundance, I hope.
Right. Yeah, they are. They got a little crankiness to them. Yeah. Did you, if you had to cast the film, who did you see in those two roles?
I shouldn't say anything, so I won't. But I never gave any thought until recently when I started talking about this to somebody.
Yeah.
And I still don't really have any. The closest, I think they're more like Bill and Ted, actually, if you want to. So, so Keanu isn't right. Like, I think Fran Germain kind of looks in my mind a little bit like Adam. What's his name?
Adam
Driver.
Oh, Adam Driver. Oh, he's a great actor.
But he's a little old already.
That's what. Yeah.
And I don't know, Lonnie. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't really. I never really had that in mind when I was writing. I was just trying to get from one sentence to another and make something happen.
Right. So you mentioned Jay Perini at Middlebury. He's had an amazing career, incredibly prolific. What did you learn from him, and how was he? You said he was a reader and encouraging on this novel and things. What did you learn working alongside him or with him?
Mostly that it's just about work, that it's a job. You show up at your desk and you do the job. For Jay hired me, so I gave most of my attention to my students, and I was the low man on the totem pole. So, they piled it on for especially the first few years. But that's the primary thing. I mean, I was kind of set in my ways by the time I met Jay, but in terms of taking yourself seriously as a writer, it's a matter of maybe not listening to the negative voice in your head and just making sure that you show up and you do the work, and you not necessarily take it too seriously when you don't hear from readers exactly what you want to hear. You're never going to please everybody. That's definitely one thing I learned from Jay.
Right.
There's always somebody out there who's going to take issue.
Yeah. So, environmental journalism, directing that program, were you encouraged? Were there some, fire in the belly, young investigative reporters and things that you worked with? What was the state of the students that you saw come through that program?
They were completely remarkable, Paul. And that's been one of the great gifts of my life, was to be able to do that for 7 years with Bill McKibben. And the writers, journalists we had go through there have emerged, and a few years later become really some of the best in the country right now. Sierra Murdoch's book, Yellow Bird,
Yeah, we
is
had
another
her at our
book
book
of
festival. Yeah.
incredible. She was my advisee for years. Geez, it's just one after another. Carolyn Kormann, one of the first year fellows, was just, she's now on the staff at the New Yorker, wrote a magnificent piece about the COVID vaccine, was just on MSNBC the other night. It's a long list. Jesse Williamson was just getting a PhD in bird biology, avian biology at University of New Mexico. Spectacular writer, just had an amazing piece in Outside Magazine. Probably fully half of our fellows have emerged as either full-time journalists with major bylines, or frequent freelancers at least, or more.
That's great.
And it was exciting working with them the whole time. I learned so much from them. They were really at the front line of stories as they were emerging before KXL pipeline, early versions, first whispers of that, first whispers of what was going on up in northern Alberta with the tar sands. We got it all first and fresh. And one of the reasons some of their stories didn't land at first was because they were 2 or 3 years, really out in front of stuff breaking.
Right.
So they learned a lot from doing it, and they learned a lot from each other. And one of the great things since the fellowship program ended that I've seen is how they stay together among their own cohort, but also across the different years. And that's been really rich to watch.
That's wonderful to hear. That's encouraging. I'm glad to hear. I still write a weekly column at the Times Union. I keep my hand in journalism, but do you still do some journalism, or?
I haven't in a while, and mostly I have been a journalist as an editor more than a reporter myself. I don't have the patience or the chops. But I've done it, I always try to stick it in,
Yeah.
whatever, I write essays that, have journalism in them. And,
Yeah.
and if I, accept a magazine assignment, I fudge it. I turn an essay into a journalism piece.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I mean, right now I'm trying to get a bunch of other things out, but I have stuff in the wind that I might have to, after things clear up with the Rona, I might have to get out in the world with a notebook and a tape recorder again.
Yeah.
And I do miss doing that.
Yeah.
For sure. And there will be plenty of, firsthand reporting in that book when it finally emerges after way too long.
Yeah. I'd forgotten Bill McKibben. I knew he was there, but I forgot you two were connected to that. I mean, he's a hero. I still remember he came in with this manuscript to the Times Union, whatever, 30 years ago, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody was that interested in talking to him. I was like, I'll talk with him. It sounds interesting. The End of Nature,
Yeah.
long before he became a national figure. And he had this book. And I was like, this is pretty interesting. This guy's onto something,
One of the things you asked about the fellowship was how that went, and how it appeared in the process. And I have to say, maybe at the beginning of it, we all still had this kind of rosy, old-fashioned idea that if we told the stories right and we could get them out there at a time when there wasn't a lot of environmental journalism happening, then we could really have an impact.
Right.
Really put up a kind of a wake-up call make something happen, when we, maybe Obama would be president and we could make progress. And every spring at where we met out in near Monterey, on the last night of this week-long, we had a week-long residency at Breadloaf in the fall and a week-long residency in California in the spring. At the end of the one in the spring, when everybody had written their stories and we'd been workshopping the stories all week, everybody would show a slideshow from their reporting trips, and they were from all over the world. I mean, just, they went everywhere. And by halfway through that slideshow, everybody's sitting around having a beer and a glass of wine or whatever. Everybody was so fucking depressed.
Yeah. Right.
It was,
right.
And I think in the process, about halfway through that program, I know I realized, I think maybe some other people did, that we were mostly in the process of documenting, I don't know what, a serious decline.
Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah. There's a question I've been meaning to ask you, because early on, before I made the connection, how often are you mistaken for the folk singer?
All my life.
Singer-songwriter Christopher Shaw, who I'm a good friend with him and his wife Bridget, but because he had an Adirondack
16
bass.
and I would be up on the east side of Lake George, and he would. We were playing at the Jolly Roger in the Lake George Club, and people would go thinking it was me or him. And then when I was a senior in high school, I would play at the Elbow Room on Delaware Avenue.
Right.
And then years later, he was playing at the Elbow Room, and people would go to see him, or thinking it was me. But I hadn't been playing out in years. We'd get each other's checks.
There's a story there, probably. I didn't realize you were a performer too, way back in the day or something.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah. What did you play?
Guitar.
Your own songs or covers? Or?
No. I've totally failed as a songwriter. I have no idea how to do that. But I think in my late life, I have figured out how to write a song. It's like you have to put in a lot of yeahs.
I think you need some of those flappers from the power line in there. They always draw attention. That's what I was mentioning. Boy, there's very some erotic and sexy scenes in the power line too, to let readers know about that.
Well, here's the thing. If you went to the Schaefer Library in Union College and you read from one end of the Adirondack collection to the other, or the Paul Schaefer Library out on St. James David's Lane or whatever, you would think that the Adirondack experience of the last 300 years was completely celibate.
Yes.
Right? That's one of the reasons why the Martha Reben book is so good, is because there's no sex in it, there's no love in it or anything like that. But there's this implication. I don't know, it's sort of like, and this is probably canceled now, but there's the great scene in Vertigo where Jimmy Stewart picks her up Kim Novak out of the bay, and he takes her back to his apartment, and all you see is he lies her down on the bed, and then in the morning she gets up in her towel, and you realize that, oh my God,
yeah,
he must have undressed her. And
right.
It's like, ooh.
That wouldn't fly with the censors back then, so they had to just suggest it.
So there's nothing really much more than that. The other one is this famous, I just love this scene in Scorsese's movie of the Edith Wharton novel.
Oh, Age of Innocence?
Age of Innocence.
Yeah.
Where Madame Olenska and what's his name are sitting in the carriage, and she's back from someplace, and he's like asking her to meet him, and she's got her hand open, and you see her wrist is exposed. And it's like, whoa, dude, So it's like when, my character Rosalind is out at the lake with Germaine, or up on the high peaks with Jung, she exposes her ankles.
Right.
And it's like, hubba, hubba.
Very risque for that time. So we could go on, but I think we should, because our friend John Warren's going to have to edit this. So any words for
Oh, no,
John?
I'm sorry, all this blather. Jeez.
Any words for the editor of the Adirondack Almanac and the Writers Institute colleague of ours?
Many thank you to John Warren for being one of the great purveyors. You know, here's the thing. I have been riding around maybe Vermont or maybe back home in the Adirondacks on a Friday morning, and John Warren's conditions report will come on.
Right.
And it's so comprehensive. And there's just this scroll work of place names, you know,
Right.
and you know, minute explanations of snow quality or ice conditions, and which I know these places and I know what those things are like, and a whole universe expands in my mind just from listening to that. I wish we'd had that back in the 70s and the 80s, somebody to tell us all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to just go to those places and like be like, oh shit, I can't get across that.
He's an amazing, multifaceted, multi-talented. He juggles so many things, and he's often, you know, behind the scenes or unsung, but he has created an amazing resource website, all things Adirondack, you know.
Truly.
Yeah. So we'll look for that memoir. Now, do you have a title, or is it going to be the last thing again when do you have a working title for it at all?
The Crazy Wisdom.
Nice. I think that that sums up, you know, a life's lessons in 2 words. But this has been fun, Christopher Shaw, not the folk singer, but a one-time folk singer.
Thank you. Yes, it's so confusing.
Chris, this has been a lot of fun. We hope when the vaccine and everything is all clear that you'll come down to the Writers Institute and we'll get John Warren there, and maybe the 3 of us can have a conversation on stage or something.
Nothing would make me happier.
Excellent. Hey, thank you very much for being part of the conversation, and be safe, and look forward to that memoir.